everyone. Good evening. It's wonderful to be here. I just drove down the coast from San Francisco, and the whole way down, I was reminded of how beautiful and how lucky we are to live where we live. And speaking about nature, I've gone many places around the world and have become so passionate about protecting the Amazon rainforest after going there when I was a student at UC Santa Barbara. But I'm always reminded of the privilege and the privilege it is to live in California. And I'm a California girl, born and raised in San Diego. My family's from Mexico. And I want to start with a story because I feel like that's kind of what we do these days, to try to talk about what we do and talk about what is going on in the world through stories. And I think that's one of the best ways that we can communicate everything that's happening right now, through our stories. And my story begins in San Diego, when a professor, one of my teachers, he invited a friend of his who was living in Ecuador. He invited him to our Earth Day gathering. And at that time, he was showing a slideshow, beautiful photos of the Ecuadorian Amazon. And at that time, this was the early 90s, I thought, wow, one day I want to go there. And hopefully I'll get to see the rainforest before it all burns down. This is like my 16-year-old thought. Hopefully, I'll get to see it someday. And I had the honor when I was at UC Santa Barbara to do an internship. They said, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? You want to do something local, work with some local NGO? I said, I want to go to the rainforest. And really, I went down to the rainforest to see the rainforest. I wanted to see the rainforest and participate in a volunteer project to learn about the rainforest. And little did I know, on the way, how many of you have been to Ecuador? To the Andes or to the Amazon in Ecuador? Okay, so many of you know, well, at least 20 years ago, the trip to get to the Amazon took half a day. At that time, it took about 12 hours to get to Lago Agrio, about 8 hours to get to Tena. And we were, leaving Quito, going through the valley, going over the Andes Mountains, crossing Papayacta, and along the river, you see beautiful waterfalls. In the cloud forest, you go through cloud forest, you go through rainforest, into lowland tropical rainforest. And as we were crossing the cloud forest, the bus stops, and, this is a bus, one of the buses that, you've seen Romancing the Stone. Maybe that's way, you guys, your parents saw Romancing the Stone. Well, the bus with the chickens and the pigs and families and everyone on the bus, well, that was the kind of bus that you took to the rainforest at that time. And the bus suddenly stops, and everybody's like, what's happening? And it turns out the bus was going to stop and wasn't going to move for a long time because there was an oil spill. And literally there was a trans-Ecuadorian pipeline gushing oil into the Papayacta River, the river that feeds, it's a water source, the primary water source for Quito and many other surrounding communities. And that was, any environmental studies students here? The shocker moment. That's, in environmental studies, we say that the shocker moment that you kind of wake up. And that was my shocker moment. It was just, I could not believe that there was just gallons and gallons and gallons, barrels of oil just spilling, and there was no emergency response. And little did I know that was business as usual. And that was the way things were done at that time. There wasn't any real emergency response, and that's because the infrastructure of the oil operations in Ecuador were set up by Texaco, now Chevron, and they were set up in a way that was to drill and dump. They were set up in a way that was not to abide by industry standards. It was not to, follow international law. It was to do it the cheapest way possible, for 20 years and then get out. And that's what they did. They set up the oil infrastructure 1960s. They were there for 20 years. They turned it over to Petroecuador. But when they arrived to what they thought was just empty, rainforest. But it was actually the homeland of 5 indigenous nationalities: the Quichua, the Kofan, the Siona, the Secoya, and the Waurani. And Emergildo Criollo is a friend of mine who I've worked with for many years. He's a Kofan leader. He says that when he was a young boy, and when the oil companies first came, when Texaco first came, they saw metal birds, giant metal birds, that they had never seen before. But all of a sudden, the giant metal birds started to arrive, and they started bringing things that they had never seen before, like cheese, to entice them, like canned fish, things that they had never seen before. And it reminds you of, these videos that you see, trinkets and beads, and videos like old black and white videos that you think, happened so long ago. Well, it wasn't really that long ago that this happened. This happened in the 1960s, 1970s, and actually it continues to happen till today. So that's one of the things I really want to leave you with today, is that the destruction that was caused by the opening of the Amazon in Ecuador, and the offering of trinkets and beads to indigenous people so that they can hand over their rights and their territories. That was kind of the beginning of the opening of the frontier in Ecuador and many other parts of the Amazon to oil companies and other extractive industries. And it continues to today. So I'm going to actually go to my slideshow here. And there it is. I'm going to just talk while you see some photos, and you'll get a sense of what we do. For those of you who don't know, Amazon Watch is a nonprofit organization that started in 1996, and we work to protect the Amazon rainforest and advance the rights of indigenous peoples. And we partner with indigenous and environmental organizations throughout the Amazon basin. We work with them to preserve the Amazon and its ecological systems. And we believe, and we know actually through many, many recent studies, that indigenous people of the Amazon are the best protectors of the Amazon. And they are, because not only because they have been the best, that they have been there for thousands of years, but they have the most to lose if their rainforests are lost, if their territories are lost. They depend on the land for medicines, for their food, for their entire life, for their spiritual well-being, for their life, their culture, their food, their medicine. They always tell us it's our pharmacy. It's not only our market, our mercado, but it's our pharmacy. And it's what, keeps them connected to the land. This is, last year we were at the climate conference in Lima, Peru, and these were it was a gathering of indigenous people on the beach. One of the photos will come up. But we got together we worked with indigenous people from across Peru and Ecuador and Brazil to raise attention at the Global Climate Conference that in order to protect our climate, we have to protect forests. And the tropical rainforests are some of the most threatened. And if we're going to protect the tropical rainforests, we have to defend indigenous peoples' rights and territories. And so this is a human banner we made. It says, indigenous peoples and rights. Maybe let me pause it back. How do I do that? How do I go back? There we go. So it says, peoples and rights are the living forests. And I want to pause on this slide for a second, because the living forests are the solution to protecting the Amazon rainforest. The living forests are not just, as my friend and colleague Patricia Walinga says, they're not just the trees. They're not just the intact rainforests. They're not just the rivers and the streams and the plants and the animals. They're also the spirits. And it's something, she says, something that you guys don't understand. You guys believe in fairies and gnomes and things like that, but we have forest people too. They're not spirits per se. They're people, they're beings that protect the rainforest. And the more we allow oil companies, mining industries, extractive industries, mega development, extractive industrial development in the most pristine, most biologically diverse place on the planet, we are not only destroying the rainforests and not only destroying the cultures, we're also destroying the spirits. And if we destroy those spirits and those beings, the rainforest can't be. And their vision for the living forest is pretty simple. It's the living forest is an intact ecosystem where all the plants and animals, where all the people and the beings can live in harmony, in balance. And that's what they've been doing, and that's what they want to continue doing. And that is a solution to climate change, because if any of you have seen the stats about rainforest destruction, it's pretty drastic. We're losing like 7 football fields a minute just in the Amazon alone. And the deforestation that's happening in the Amazon rainforest, it's not only destroying the trees and the livelihoods of indigenous peoples, it's affecting the flying rivers. And just curious, has anybody heard of the flying rivers? Yes. So this is something that even myself, who's been working on protecting the Amazon rainforest and working with indigenous peoples to protect their territories, this is a recent concept that I've learned, and it's from a scientist, a climate scientist in Brazil named Antonio Nobre. And he talks about the flying rivers, which are basically the massive amounts of water that are lifted from the trees, all of the trees of the rainforest of the Amazon. They lift up all this water and they form clouds. And those clouds not only irrigate fertile rain on top of the Amazon, but the entire South American continent. And they create clouds even for as far away as North America. And this year, because of deforestation, because of increased emissions in the region, the flying rivers are off course, and drastically off course. And they cause massive flooding in western Amazonia, and they cause massive drought in places like São Paulo and in the Amazon. São Paulo is a city of 20 million people. 20 million people, right? And last February, they basically said that they had 6% of their reservoirs. And I started thinking, well, California, we have 40 million people. And, scientists are predicting pretty similar scenarios where, we're pretty much running out of water. And you started to make the connection of, why is this happening? And it's not, the solution is not just let's all take shorter showers. That's what, the corporations and the governments want us to believe. Take shorter showers and everything will be okay. Let's build another dam in the Amazon and everything will be okay. That's what they want us to believe. But we know that more mega dams in the Amazon and allowing more agribusiness to continue business as usual and allowing mega mining, mega oil and gas infrastructure and roads and new railways through the Amazon are not going to reduce the drought. There's similar kind of culprits in the mega droughts in California and in Brazil and the Amazon. And they're agribusiness and oil, actually. Big industry are responsible for our climate injustices. And what we work on is we work with communities who are on the front lines of climate change, who are demanding justice in cases like the Chevron case. You know, this company that went into indigenous peoples' territories and drilled and dumped and left 18 billion gallons of toxic wastewater, not to name the thousands of oil spills and the oil spill one a day that continues to this day. They set up the infrastructure, they drilled and dumped, and you know, for 20 years, the Chevron case has been in hearings and trials. And the last 2 years have been particularly difficult because Chevron, after they were found guilty after almost 20 years of trials, they were found guilty in an Ecuadorian court for $9 billion of cleanup fees. And they basically said, we're going to fight this till hell freezes over. We're never going to pay a penny to the Ecuadorian government. We're never going to, you know, it's not our responsibility. It's the Ecuadorian government's responsibility. So they've been fighting. They have over 200 lawyers fighting to never pay a penny. And just today, if you go on our website, you'll see some pretty amazing news. I was just telling Flora and TJ right before this that the judge who basically lied, the judge who said, you know, the plaintiffs and their lawyers forced me to write this judgment, he admitted on Friday that he lied. And the reason why this is important is because the Chevron and Ecuador case could have been enforced a couple of years ago, but Chevron took it to a federal court here in the United States, and a judge that is in Chevron's favor has taken the case and made the plaintiffs, their allies, and their lawyers look like frauds. And now the judge whose basis for this case to take place admitted that he lied. So it basically is like 2.5 years of a waste of time and a lot of credibility, stories going back and forth, like who's right, who's wrong. And I always told people, even our supporters who were like, gosh, we don't know, you know, Chevron says that, you know, people lie. And I'm like, who would you believe? You believe 30,000 people in the Amazon who are living in this toxic waste, you know, who are still living amongst this. Would you believe them or would you believe Chevron? And then, you know, the story would end right there. But, you know, it did create a lot of doubt for people about what was really going on. And we really look at the Chevron case. The reason I talk about it so much is because this is one of those cases that we don't want to be repeated. We talk about it, and the indigenous people, they talk about it, and they say, we know, we've seen what Chevron and Petroecuador and, you know, these companies, we've seen what they've done in the northern Ecuadorian Amazon, and we don't want the same for the southern Ecuadorian Amazon. And right now, what we're calling for is keeping the oil in the ground, not only in the Amazon, the most biodiverse, the largest and the most biodiverse rainforest on the planet, but keep fossil fuels in the ground from the Arctic to the Amazon. And why is this? Well, it's pretty well known we're in a pretty dire climate scenario right now. Our global leaders have about 5 weeks to figure it out. And global scientists have said that we need to keep our global temperatures. We cannot let global temperatures rise more than 2 degrees or face climate chaos. In order to avoid a 2-degree rise in temperatures, we have to keep 80%. First it was 2/3, now it's 3/4. 80% of fossil fuels in the world have to remain in the ground. And so our partners in the Amazon have been saying this forever. Like, we don't want oil extraction on our territories. We want to protect our territories. We want our rights protected. We don't want oil extraction, mining extraction that doesn't benefit us on our territories. Even the Ecuadorian president when he came into office in 2007, he had a revolutionary idea that really came from our partners, our indigenous allies and NGO allies in Ecuador. And the idea was, let's leave the oil in the ground in Yasuni National Park. Let's leave it under the ground, and the international community can contribute to keep the fossil fuel, the oil in the ground. They contribute, it was like $3 billion instead of the $9 billion that they would have gained from selling that oil. So for about 6 years, Correa and his government were promoting keeping oil in the ground in Yasuni National Park, the most biodiverse national park, biodiverse rainforest in the world. Let's keep the oil in the ground. And then all of a sudden, 2 years ago, in August of 2013, he abandoned the idea. And to the shock of everyone, it's like, nope, no, not enough. We didn't get enough contributions, so we're going to drill in Yasuni. And the reason he did that was because the oil price was really high at that time, one. And two, the Ecuadorian government is $32 billion in debt to China. And they have agreed that they will pay back those loans, that debt, in oil. So they saw, but the other thing that caused and led to that decision was that in the southern Ecuadorian Amazon, the resistance is really strong. Really strong. It's really, the indigenous people in the southern Amazon, which is, I should have had a map here, but Yasuni National Park is kind of in the middle of the Amazon in Ecuador. And then everything south of it is indigenous people's territory. It actually, in Ecuador, the indigenous people have their territory recognized, as opposed to in other places like in Peru, they don't have territorial recognition. They only have title to specific parts of land, not entire territories. So that's actually pretty special in Ecuador, that they have their territory recognized. And the Achuar people, the Shuar people, the Waurani, the Quichua, the Zapara, the Shiriar, they basically spoke truth to power and said, we're not going to allow any oil drilling on our land when the government proposed to basically auction off in the 11th round all of their territory. They opened up 21 oil blocks, and over a year-long period, the indigenous people basically said, we're not going to let you drill in our land. We coordinated with them, we supported them as the Ecuadorian government went around the world, here in Ecuador, here to Houston, to Calgary, to China, to London, everywhere they went, we went, and basically told the investors, don't invest in the Amazon. The people are not going to let you in. And we basically gave them the example of the case in Sarayaku. This is actually in the Quichua community of Sarayaku. And the people of Sarayaku are my inspiration to continue this work. They are people who are very determined to keep their lives and culture and territories and their rights respected. And in 2002, when the government gave permission for an Argentinian company, CGC, to go onto their land, they said no, but the government didn't respect that, and they sent the military in with the company. And they caused a lot of violence. They caused a lot of pressure on the community, and for like 8 months to a year, they basically made the community live in a state of terror because it was like surrounded by military and oil workers. But they got a lot of support in the country and got a lot of international support and got their story out. And they exhausted they went to, all the different all the different entities in Ecuador to try to seek justice, and they exhausted those remedies, and so they went to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights of the OAS in Washington. And the commission heard their case. Basically, they said that their rights had been violated. Their right to free, prior, and informed consent was violated. There's violence committed against them. The ILO 169 was violated. And the commission heard their case. And to make a long story short, after 10 years of hearings and visits by commissioners, they won their case at the Inter-American Court on Human Rights in Costa Rica in 2012. And what they won was, one, the oil company and the military had to leave. The government had to admit that it was their fault and that they would never do this again. They agreed to remove the seismic, the dynamite, which thousands of pounds of dynamite still exist in their territory. They haven't removed that. They had to pay the community $1.2 million to invest in their forest management plan. So I mention this because this is not only a historic case for the Quichua of Sarayaku, but for indigenous rights and territories all over the world. It's a precedent-setting case for indigenous rights and territories, and unfortunately, it's being violated right now. Because of the success of Sarayaku and the success of women, in particular, women and youth organizing in Ecuador, the women led a mobilization for life right before the 11th round auction. And it was the first time that the women had marched from the Amazon to Quito without the leadership of the men. They basically took it upon themselves, walked from town to town with their babies on their back, with the men supporting them from behind, and they walked to Quito. And after like a few days in Quito saying, we're mobilizing for life, we don't want oil drilling on our land, we're not going to negotiate, they were forced to have to hear Patricia Walinga on the floor of the Congress talking about the rights of nature and the rights of indigenous peoples and territories and their right for a living forest. And that was an introduction of the living forest concept and idea and solution to the world. And we're getting ready to bring that message to our global leaders at COP21 in Paris. How much more time do I have? I'm done. Okay. And we're together with, last year when we were mobilizing at COP20 at the UNFCCC 20th Congress, 20th gathering, we did this human banner, and there was a lot of, following that event, Patricia Walinga and a lot of the leaders from Sarayaku came together and said, we really want to bring and amplify the message of living forests in a much bigger way. We want to bring the message of our solution, which is to protect the living forest and keeping the oil in the ground. We want to bring that to Paris. And they said, support us in bringing a delegation from Sarayaku. Support us in bringing a symbol of the living forest, which is a canoe. And so literally we're in the midst of transporting a canoe from Sarayaku to Paris. And when we started talking about this idea, we started talking about it with our indigenous allies from North America. And they got really excited about it too. And they're like, well, we want to bring canoes too. So now it's not just an idea from Sarayaku, now it's an indigenous flotilla. And the Lummi people from Washington, from an island off the coast of Washington, they're making canoes and they're shipping them to Paris as well. Another canoe coming from Canada. But the idea is that there's going to be, the message is that indigenous peoples of the world, remember this, if you remember anything from what I just said, is 80% of the world's resources are on indigenous peoples' lands. And that is why right now they're in the height of resistance. And I will say we, because I'm Chicana, and we have been resisting for hundreds of years. And we're not going to stop. And we have solutions, and we want them to be heard. And that's why we're going to COP20 to tell our global leaders, we're not going to wait for you to come up with this agreement. We're telling you that The only way we're going to avoid climate catastrophe is by keeping fossil fuels in the ground and holding industries accountable. It's not just fossil fuels, many extractive industries. But the global leaders aren't even talking about extraction. They're just talking about reducing emissions. So we're going there to tell them, you have to talk about extraction. If you care about your children and any future on this planet, you have to talk about extraction. And you have to listen to those who are resisting and those who are promoting solutions. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.